Welcome back to the Men of Valor podcast. Yes, I am an executive. I know you have not heard my voice in several weeks. Life is crazy. Man, this is Randall. I'm so excited to be back on the podcast. It's been a while. My wife was asking me, why haven't you been podcasting? And I said, honestly, I've just been slammed. But I'm excited to be here on this episode. And I'm also excited to be joined with a very special guest and a dear friend of mine, and someone that I talk to pretty often. I actually called on him this past week and sought some counsel with none other than Mr. Brent Taylor over in Oregon. Brent, how's it going, man?
Hey, it's going good. It's good to be on here and good to see your face, man.
Absolutely, absolutely. Brent, we've known each other for several years. Man, you have helped me navigate through some challenges in life and different things that I faced. And so, man, anytime I get a chance to talk with you, and especially on our topic we're going to talk about here in just a little bit, man, I just appreciate your wisdom and your friendship. And so, man, what's new with you? What's going on in the Taylor household?
Well, Taylor household's busy right now. My beautiful daughter just turned 18, so we have 3 adults and 1 kid in the house left. But yeah, that was exciting last weekend. It was fun. Staying busy with my son with school. But we're getting ready to head for do a little beach trip starting Thursday evening. And it's been a while since we've got away just as a family. So looking forward to that because life and work's busy.
Hey, that's awesome, man. I'm glad you guys are going to get away. And yeah, Brooklyn and I almost share a birthday, just a few days apart. Awesome people are born in mid-March. And so, yeah, happy for her and happy for you guys. But man, Brent, you're an avid listener to the podcast. I think you told me that you only missed one or maybe not missed any episodes, and you catch up and you listen to them. And man, I just want to ask you, as someone who's listened to the episodes, who's listened to the other guys since the beginning, man, what are your thoughts? How has this podcast ministered to you? And man, what would you encourage guys that may be listening to this episode for the first time? Maybe they're new to Men of Valor.
Well, I can tell you this much. This is a ministry, and it's ran by brothers and guys that are the real deal. And when I say that is they're genuine, they're authentic. They speak the truth. They can slap you across the face, but then hug you right afterwards. Because that's what we do. Men, we support each other. We love each other, but we also shake each other when that's necessary. This has ministered to me in numerous ways. Numerous of topics that we've talked about with you, with Travis, with Jordan, with Eric, have had so many great opportunities to learn, not only from you all, but on topics that are relevant. And this isn't just guys talking about guy stuff, which there's 150 podcasts if you want to join that. This is guys talking about real issues, real struggles, talking about an awesome God that loves us through it all. And so I listen to a lot of podcasts, and this is one, like you said, I've caught them all. But some I've had to go all the way back. They're like, oh, I forgot that one. But I get the privilege of listening to them. And then a couple of days later, sometimes I'll then rewatch them because I get to see your guys' faces. So if you're listening to us on a podcast, awesome. You don't have to see my face. But if you're on YouTube and watching this, it's nice to meet you all.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I love that. That makes me feel good and confident that we're doing what God's called us to do. And so, man, I appreciate you being here, and just want to offer a little bit of an introduction. Nothing left to do, man. Let's get after it.
This is the Men of Valor podcast. We exist to help men grow as disciples of Jesus.
Welcome to Season 2. We're glad you're here.
Let me tell you, I once was a sinner, but I am no longer a sinner. I am a saint. I am a son of the living God Most High.
Go home, embrace your wife with no expectations, and tell her that you love her. And ask her, how can I lead you? Tell me what you need. Be transparent, be open, be honest.
But if we arm ourselves and we never use what we have, that's useless.
Hey guys, thank you so much for listening. Here are your hosts, Travis Watson, Eric Stewart, Jordan Loggins, and Randal Ballew. Let's get after it.
So glad that you guys are here as Mr. Brent Taylor and I are going to have a conversation and talk about maybe a difficult topic for some. You know, the conversations, Brent, that men are having in churches very seldom include the topics of sexual immorality, because this is such a taboo thing that churches have avoided for so long. But I feel like there may be a bit of a change in that. And what I like and what I see is that men are starting to own their sin and own their struggles. And, you know, Brent and I have been challenged with the topic of, you know, what does it mean to be pure? And in light of like the single man's life, what is a single man supposed to do? And I don't think I can approach this topic, Brent, without thinking of both of my sons. And, you know, I've got an 11-year-old and a 7-year-old. And even as young as they are, my mind is already, you know, shifting towards how am I going to help them as young single men live a pure life? Because I'll tell you this, just to be transparent, if they live a life parallel to the life their father lived when he was a young man, they're in trouble. All right. And that's about all I'm going to say in that. I've made my fair share of mistakes. Thankfully, God's grace is so good, and Lauren's grace is so good. I want my boys to be different. And so, talking about the pure heart, purity, man, I just want to read just a verse or two from 1 Corinthians, just to kind of get our minds right. And then, Brent, I want us to kind of talk. 1 Corinthians chapter 6, starting in verse 12, it says, all things are lawful for me, but not all things are helpful. All things are lawful for me, but I will not be dominated by anything. Food is meant for the stomach, and the stomach for food. And God will destroy both one and the other. The body is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. And God raised the Lord and will also raise us up by his power. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ? Shall I then take the members of Christ and make them members of a prostitute? Never. Or do you know that he who is joined to a prostitute becomes one body with her? For it is written, the two will become one flesh. But he who is joined to the Lord becomes one spirit with him. And here's the common verse, everybody. Everybody's heard and everybody knows. Flee from sexual immorality. Every other sin a person commits is outside the body, but the sexual immoral person sins against his own body. And then we could keep going in that and finish that. It says, you are not your own, for you were bought with a price. So glorify God in your body. And this passage has been referenced many times on the podcast. And I read this and I think instantly, Brent, I feel conviction. And I begin to navigate and unpack things in my own life. I wish that I would have had somebody speak this truth boldly and plainly to me as a young man. As a young man, the talk that I had with my father was, don't get her pregnant. And I mean, what a terrible thing to tell, a 13-year-old boy who's learning things, seeing things, figuring out, hey, I'm attracted to those things. I like those things, and not understanding why my mind is working that way. And my fear is that our children, our young men, I don't want them to go through those phases in life without some guidance, especially for them, as they're going to be single young men, and they're going to have the hormones and emotions and everything that come with being a young man. And I think this applies not only to our children, but it also applies to the single man out there who isn't married or doesn't have a spouse and is navigating this as a grown adult. And so, Brent, I want to ask you, just as we begin, this passage says for us to flee sexual immorality. And Brent, you can share a little bit about your career field and what you do. What are some of the dangers that young men, single men, find themselves in when it comes to sexual immorality? Why is there such a challenge for us to flee from that when we're that age or when we're young and single?
Well, that's a great question. And just to start off, that you just said, why is it difficult? Why is it hard to flee? Because those that aren't single, or those that are in relationships, and those that have experienced sexual intimacy or intimacy with another, the reason it's so hard to flee it is because there's a reason we pursue it. It feels good. It's great. It's an amazing connection that you have with a person. But it should be that connection, an amazing attachment with that person, of someone that you're obviously following biblical principles to and being committed, married to. And Randall and I will not be on here to shame anybody in regards to stumbles and things they do. I stumble. I didn't say I stumbled. I've stumbled, and I know I probably will stumble again sometime. But thankfully, yeah, we have brothers, we have grace, we have forgiveness, we have prayer. I don't want to be reliant on those, but we serve a God that is with us in the middle of it all. While you're doing the sin, he's there. He doesn't go away. So when you see that Jesus, when you see those memes and that little Jesus thing pops up behind someone's head, guys, he's there.
Absolutely.
But just a quick rundown. I have had the privilege of being married to my beautiful bride for I think we're going on 22 years. I've been with her for almost 24 years. Actually 24 years. We've known each other for about 25. And yeah, I'll just say, I wish I could have given the same gift my bride gave me. But because of all the things that Randall said, I won't go into great detail. But yeah, I wasn't following a pure lifestyle when I was a single man. I was not doing what he just said. I was not fleeing. I was running too. I was coping with some loss in my life at the time. And I coped in ways that, I won't go into detail on a video or a podcast, but in ways that were sexually impure. And I got the privilege of being my wife, and sometimes you'll hear us refer to him as my bride, her first boyfriend, her first kiss, her first fill in the blank. And for many years, I lived in a lot of shame that I did not give her the same gifts that she gave me. Yeah. And so, to answer your original question, man, of why is it so hard to flee? Because it's powerful, it's appealing, it feels good, it meets all these temporary needs that we are seeking. And I always say, why do we go to them? And I said, well, just always remember, a temporary decision, a brief and temporary decision, can have a lifetime of consequences. And some of those consequences are beautiful on the other end of it. I know guys that have amazing kids outside of wedlock, and they're phenomenal dads and amazing. But I don't know many of those that are still married or that married that lady. And so there's that. And so I have a 14-year-old son. His name's Cole, and it's what we talk about often in regards to, hey man, don't make temporary decisions that could have a lifetime of obligations, priorities, sacrifice, if you're not ready. If you're not ready, if you're not committed, and not blessed by the Lord. So hopefully that answered some of your question.
Yeah, man. And I'm glad that you mentioned Cole, and I love that you mentioned that the reason it's hard to flee for the young man, the single man, and thinking back to my life as a young man. And what I want to share with my sons, Caleb and Cooper, is you're right, that temporary high, it immediately runs out. And we pursue that because we like that feeling, we like that emotion. But the next day, you're left with nothing but guilt and conviction. And, Brent, I was saved when I was 12 years old. And so the majority of the sins that I committed in my life happened after my salvation. And man, I think about Caleb and I think about Cole and our boys. And man, if I could challenge even a father, it would be the moment you feel like you need to have that conversation with your son, you're already too late. You need to have that conversation before you even expect to have that conversation. Some kids, man, and I see this in student ministry, some kids don't even think twice about it until they're, junior or senior in high school. Unfortunately, and what you've seen, Brent, is some kids, especially young men, are made aware of these things at such a young age that sexual addiction, it's starting at 10 years old. And unfortunately, not to be too graphic, unfortunately, some of those addictions are because of horrible people doing horrible things. But also because we're not having conversations with those young men. We're not having those conversations ahead of time. And I think why it is one, because we don't want to own our own crap. Because we're superheroes, man. We're dad, right? We fix the problems. And for us to be open and honest about our mistakes and our failures when it comes to this topic, we have to pull the veil back and get transparent. And I'm going to tell you, man, it's not comfortable. But us being uncomfortable is worth protecting the hearts and minds of our children. And especially the hearts and minds of others. Brent, I mean, you think about that struggle at, 14 to 18 years old as a teenager and then growing up, it's difficult. Man, you think I could not imagine being a 22 to 30-year-old and not married. I don't know how guys do it. I was counseling with a guy not long ago, and he's a wonderful guy. He's a nice guy. He's starting a business for himself. I'm not going to tell anybody what his business is because people that know me would know him. He's a nice guy, but he's a single guy and he struggles. He's 30 something years old, a little bit younger than me. And you can just see it on his face as a single young man fleeing from this. It's difficult because he's crippled by it, because he chases that emotional high. Man, I'm fortunate at 33 years old, I get to go home at night and lay next to my bride. And I'm not even talking about the intimate act, Brent. You've been married longer than I have. It's just being in her presence. Just being in her presence. And that is fulfilling the need of that temporary high, right? Just being around her. But man, I can't imagine if I was 33 years old and I know that I didn't have my bride to come home to and lay in the bed next to and, or sit next to or be next to, or even just to look at. Like, I like looking at my wife, right? Even just to look at, I think to myself, what would I do? You read this and you say, flee immorality. Man, that's easier said than done. Because how does that apply to other areas of life? I've been out of shape, overweight for years. I know the programs. I know what to do. But I'm going to tell you this right now. If there's cookie cake in my refrigerator, I have a hard time fleeing from that cookie cake. Here's the difference. Cookie cake is going to make me fat. Sexual immorality is going to cost me everything. And that's just the cold hard truth. So, I'm glad that you mentioned Cole. And thinking about that, I'm confident you and Cole have you said that y'all have already started having conversations. I just want to ask you, are the conversations you've had with Cole, and you can ask me the same thing, how different are they from the conversations that were had with you at that age? Or are they different? Or did you have a good example, or did you not? Because I'll tell you, I did not have a good example to go off of. And so I'm leaning on guys like you and other guys to help me, steward the hearts of my young boys. So what about you? I mean, I know in your profession, this is not something that you shy away from talking about. Do you disconnect work from conversations with your son? Do you disconnect your past as a child? How do you navigate that, Brent, with Cole?
No, man, I think that's an excellent question. And man, my dad's one of my best friends. My dad was the best man in my wedding. But what my dad wasn't is a guy that talked about this stuff. I never have had a conversation in my entire life with my dad about sexual immorality, sexual intimacy, other than don't do it, abstain, just what I heard in church and what was in the Bible. But also that, like, there's a generation that wasn't as comfortable of talking about things just so openly and transparently. And Randall's mentioned a few times just my career. I've had the privilege of working in the adult community corrections field as a parole probation officer and supervisor for 20 years. Of my 20 years, I have specialized and focused on working with individuals that have committed sexual offenses, that struggle with sexual addiction. And so I, for a living, talk about a lot of things no one wants to talk about. I say things and people would be like, and I'm like, I call it what it is. I don't have these little cute sayings for masturbation. I don't have these cute sayings for intercourse. And I call them what they are. Genitalia, I call it what it is. I don't shy away from those. But that's because I learned through my career of the importance of having transparent conversations.
That's good.
And I started at a young age with my kids, talking to them about, good touch, bad touch. But I wasn't just good touch, bad touch. We talked about the areas. We talked about relationships. We talked about anybody, including dad, in regards to touch, because I have a daughter and I have a son. But one of the things I share with folks, the importance of having those conversations is key. But I didn't have that growing up. And thankfully, I'm just going to say this, thankfully, I had a youth minister that I was close with and paced with. And he would talk to us about the war of combating, sexual temptation. And though Randall just mentioned being in his 30s. I've been married. I've been engaged since I've been 21 years old. I've been married at 22. I'm 43 years old. So I couldn't imagine, same thing, of not coming home to my bride. And I say mine because she would say that's my husband and that's my bride.
Right.
That's we're together. But being 33 and knowing if I was 33 and single, or if I was 29 and single, knowing how amazing intimacy is and feels, it would be a struggle. It would be a daily battle of waging a war against not seeking that feeling. And you're right. If it's not outside of a committed relationship, then it's temporary. It's a temporary, and that's why you chase it again, and then you chase it again, and then you chase it again, because it's temporary, but it's that temporary happiness, that temporary feeling of, man, that felt amazing.
Yeah.
Sexual intimacy, sexual climax, all that stuff. It feels good. It's amazing. And people shy away from having conversations and real talk with people. I started having the conversation with my son about images, about pornography, about masturbation, about, like I said, the touch, good touch, bad touch. Probably had started that conversation when he was 7. Because I work with individuals that a lot of the themes that I saw, that they were either like Randall said, some of them were abused. But the biggest thing was, at what age were you first exposed to pornography? That is the key to a lot of our conversations here of sexual temptation and trying to flee it, because it's getting earlier and earlier and earlier. And like Randall said, the average age that a kid is first introduced to pornography, or hears the word, or sees an image, it's under 10 now. Heartbreaking. Breaks my heart. But I will share this with you without going into great detail, is I have done this for 20 years of working with guys that harm people or view things or download things they shouldn't. In 20 years, less than 5% of the clients that I have interacted with and worked with have not been addicted to pornography or introduced at a young age. So they had a skewed view of intimacy and they acted out on someone younger than them, or things like that. But 95% of the individuals were exposed to it at a young age or became addicted to it prior to ever offending another individual. Pornography and sexual temptation is really important for us to have conversations with our kids. And Randall, I'll just say this is the one thing I'll say on this question. Because if you don't have that conversation, sometimes though, your kids and sons and daughters won't be lucky enough to have a youth minister that talks about purity. They're going to be introduced to it by somebody else for the wrong reasons. And so if you're not having that conversation, there are several clients that I've supervised for many, many, many years that would love to step into that gap and be the person that introduces your child or your conversation. So there's no faux pas here. How we protect our kids. Remember, we always say men do hard things. Well, guess what's hard? Having these conversations. But if you love your children and you're not having it, maybe write out your definition of what love is again. Because loving our kids is having these conversations. So what about you and your, you said how you were introduced to it?
Yeah, man. And I think about the single man and how all of those things that happen in childhood grow and translate to the single man. When I was, 18, 19 years old, carrying the skeletons of images and things as a 12-year-old, and if we don't break that cycle in men, it is going to live with them no matter how old they are, for however long they're single, and trying to find a solution to that high. And man, like I don't want to be speculative or anything like that, but I think about the individuals that you work with. I wonder how many of them choose a different path had they had somebody have a real transparent conversation with them, because they're chasing a high. Now, it's different. It's a different high because they've gone so far. But I do, man, I wonder, like, if there's a single man and he is having other men rally around him and encourage him and pour into him and help him navigate the things that happened to him as a child, the things that he saw as a child, the struggles he had as a teenager. If there's a man in his 20s, I think he can overcome it. I absolutely do. And I think about me, man, 8 years old, maybe, when I first kind of learned what it all was. At my dad's house, they always rented movies. And, we'd watch movies as a family. We'd be in there with me, my two older brothers, and, jokingly, my stepmom and my dad would be like, cover your eyes. Well, as a curious, snot-nosed kid, of course, I'm going to peek. And so innocently exposed at that young age, because that's what they thought it was. They thought it was innocent. It wasn't innocent. It trapped me. it consumed me. And then those things, I mean, having to live with those things as a single man because I never dealt with it. And again, you talk about that high that you chase, and in the life of a single man, Brent, I would even be so bold to say that if we're not careful, we chase that high as married men. Because
Absolutely.
there's a difference between the act of intimacy and true intimacy. And honestly, the act of intimacy is such a selfish, self-centered act when it's all about us. And then true intimacy, and listen, you guys know what I'm saying here. You know, it's an act to get to a point, or it's a selfless act and a connection that brings honor and glory to God. My fear for single men is that they chase that high so much that they think they're reaching a certain status or level or a good feeling, but they're neglecting and doing a disservice to who God has called them to be in the future. It sucks that I have to look at my wife and know that I can't give her 100%. For a long time, like you said, Brent, I wrestled with that. I mean, I struggled with that deep down for years because I felt unworthy, you know? I really did. I felt unworthy. Like, I don't deserve you. And then I got to the point where I realized it's not about me at all. It's about God. And is this going to honor God? Now, listen, I get selfish, man. I do. I get selfish in my marriage. And but it's never worth it. But the moments when I'm selfless, and it's totally worth it. And I do not envy the single man at all. My heart honestly goes out to him because of how difficult it is. But I do want to encourage the single man. You also have a responsibility to be transparent. You have a responsibility to be open. Here's the thing with me. I can sit here all day long and say I didn't have somebody telling me this stuff boldly and plainly. But truthfully, Brent, I also wasn't looking for someone to tell me this stuff boldly and plainly, right? I
Oh,
was
absolutely.
I was not wanting to have that conversation. It's one of those things where as a young man, as a single man navigating this stuff, you got to ask yourself, am I serious about my faith? If I'm serious about my faith, then I'm going to read this passage in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, and I'm going to understand what Paul is writing to the church, who, mind you, the church had welcomed this sexual, just horrible ideology of what intimacy was, and it's spreading like wildfire. And you would think those morons would look back into the Old Testament and see what happens when, sexual ideologies take off and run like wildfire. Everybody dies, right? You would think they would see that. Well, Brent, you would think you and I would see that when we look at 1 Corinthians chapter 6. You look at a lot of the stories in the Bible, a lot of them deal with the single man. I mean, look at David, the single man in pursuit of something that did not belong to him because it fed a desire that he had, that he needed. And you know what? Maybe that happened because he didn't have those intentional conversations as a young man. He's sitting on that rooftop and he looks over and he sees Bathsheba. Well, Brent, that could be you or me. The question is, are you going to let somebody else be on that rooftop with you and hold you down and keep you from pursuing that as a single man? I do that as a married man, Brent. There are things in my life that I know that on my own I cannot control. There's accountability software that will send a text message within seconds to 3 or 4 people in my life. And it's the same 3 or 4 people it's been for almost 11 years because I know that I am not strong enough. I don't want to struggle with that. And fortunately, God has been so gracious to me, and I have worked through that, and that desire is not there. But even though that desire is not there, and I love my bride with all that I am, I'm not an idiot either. I know that sin is not prejudice. Sin does not care. And sin will try to trip me up. And man, I just thinking about that conversation, especially with the single man, especially with young men. You guys got to welcome somebody into your life to speak boldly, plainly, and truthfully. And you, Brent, you say this all the time. You got to receive it. You say this when we're complimenting each other, and some of us are difficult at receiving compliments or encouragement. Some of us are difficult and struggle receiving harsh conversations. But as much as we need to receive that encouragement, Brent, I believe we need to receive that correction, that rebuke, that guidance. Here's the thing, man. I don't want to see any man struggle with this. I don't. That's a perfect sinless world. Newsflash, we ain't living there. So what are we going to do about it? And I think the conversation is, and the solution is, you have conversations with your children. You have conversations that are appropriate with other young men. Mind you, don't just walk up to Walmart to a group of young men and start having sexual purity conversations. You'll end up as one of Brent's, people. All right. You don't want to do that. Okay. Appropriate conversations in appropriate settings, following appropriate guidelines that are set by those organizations, and train up these young men, these single men, and encourage them that they can live a pure life. It's going to be more difficult, but they can live a pure life if they pursue Scripture and flee immorality. And that's what I tell my friend. I say, man, quit putting yourself in a situation where you're going to make that mistake. And you know what he says? Oh man, but we weren't planning on it. And I said, every time I've ever sinned, I wasn't planning on it. I said, I don't intentionally think, I wonder how I can sin today. I allow myself to be put in situations and it happens. Or I allow myself to enter conversations, or I allow myself to get angry instead of walking away, and then I have an outburst. You see, the thing is fleeing immorality is a technical term. I mean, it's literal. You flee, like you run. Man, I think I love, there's a video years ago. It's the evangelism linebacker. Did you ever see that video, Brent?
Oh yeah.
It's hilarious. It's hilarious. And I don't know why that video cracks me up all the time, but I think about that and I always think, man, what if you're just standing around and imagine sin was a linebacker coming to just tackle you out of nowhere? What are you going to do? You just going to stand there and take it? No, you're going to run. And I love that video because, I mean, it's the opposite effect. He's evangelizing, but man, he just smokes people, right? That's what sin wants to do, but in a negative way. It wants to blindside you. And so, man, what do you think about that as far as those processes and having those conversations? Do you think it's possible for single men to remain pure, to have a pure heart before God? Because I think they need to hear that it's possible, but what do you think?
No, it absolutely is possible, but it is impossible without that intentionality. That's the key piece there is, who do you have in your life that you can openly speak to when you're struggling. Like, man, I'm really tempted this. Like you said it, Randall, of I never planned to sin. I never planned this, but you didn't plan not to either.
Ah, that's good.
Yeah, you didn't plan not to either. And so how do we put those like protections and those uh, mentors and people in our life? It takes intentionality and discipline
Yeah.
and willing to have the hard conversation with somebody, but also be willing to receive the hard conversation with someone. Like, hey, let's walk through with that decision. Like, hey, I went out. This is what happened. Yeah, I I went to a club, or nope, I was looking at this woman and I was having bad thoughts. Or went to the club, looked at the woman, and carried out those thoughts. All those conversations are okay. I'm going to walk you through like what led you to get in the car that night. You know, what were you thinking, and who were you with? Were you with guys that support your purity, or were you with the guys that don't, or were you by yourself? Maybe even worse. And putting yourself into potentially harm's way.
Yeah.
There are very few men that are strong enough to say no to temptation that's right in front of them. And I've known some very God honoring and loving men that on a temporary decision, and one person saying they felt pursued, person took interest in them, felt pursued, and it fulfilled this void that they may have, single and married, a void, and they make a quick decision and temporary decision. Like Randall said, it has a lifetime of consequences.
It does.
Sometimes marriages end. Sometimes like you may have a child, or here you gave a part of yourself away to another individual that had not earned it in regards to the love, honoring, and faithful relationship between a husband and wife. So it is having guys, and especially if you're a single male, I always say, I pace for life with a guy older than me, someone around my same age, and someone younger than me. And I have that in my life.
I'm the younger one.
He is.
Yeah.
He's one of the younger ones I would speak about. Because it is nice to have conversations with Randall, someone that realistically, a lot of the conversations him and I have, I'm like, I've been there.
Absolutely.
I dealt with that, or I navigate that, or he handled a situation or came at a situation with a perspective that because he's younger, I never even would have thought of.
Yeah.
And so I use that to go, I have a 14-year-old son. I am a lot further removed from a 14-year-old than Randall is in age. Also, that's his specialty. He works with youth. He mentors youth. So another thing that I think for single guys or guys with kids is, first and foremost, I have only about 3 guys in my life that have access to my kids. Randall's one of them. Randall's a guy that has full access to my son. Randall wouldn't need to call me and say, hey, are you good if I give Cole a call? And also I've told Cole, if you have questions that you're not comfortable to bring to me, you know who you can bring them to. And I've said Randall, I've said other guys' names, and he knows that. Not sure if he'll ever take them up on that offer, but he knows that godly men that are going to look out for his best interest and his purity will have those conversations. Yeah. Will they share with me like, hey, not the details probably, because I don't need to, but yeah, hey, Cole, I had a good conversation with Cole. But even if they didn't share it with me, I just said about 3 guys to have that conversation and just be there for my boy, be there for my son. Because like I said, he'll find others that will have conversations that I have not vetted yet, that have not earned trust with me and my bride, to be able to have those conversations. So the young kid and the single man, you're going to lose the war if you fight it alone.
That's good.
We can all say, no, I have Christ. I'm never alone. I fight with Christ. How many disciples did Christ have? Guess what? He didn't do it alone either. He could have, because he's Christ, but he chose not to. Why? Same reasons why we should choose not to,
Yeah.
because we're better together.
Yeah. Man, and I love that so much. That makes me think of I was 16 years old and had a friend named Logan, and Logan passed away in a motorcycle accident last year. Alcohol got the better of him. He was a nice guy, good father, good husband. Just had some demons he wrestled with. But we were 16 years old, and we were in the creek behind his house, and we're walking along these rocks, and there's a water moccasin. I don't see it. Okay, this thing gets you, you're done. I mean, you're done. I don't see it, but 10 feet away, Logan throws a rock right in front of my feet and hits that snake, and it takes off the other direction. And what a silly illustration, but Brent, I mean, how true to what you're saying. We have got to welcome people into our lives that can throw rocks at things that are trying to attack us, even when we don't see them, especially for the single man. You are right. You cannot do this alone. You can't. You can't. You got to have people looking out for you. You got to have people watching you. And Brent, I think you'll agree with me on this. One of the reasons we're so passionate about our boys is because we know that even once you get married, these issues don't disappear. Marriage doesn't just automatically solve these issues. It could appear to, because now you're, married to a wife, and you can do that act of intimacy whenever you please, and you no longer feel guilty. No, that's not how it works, right? Brent, I don't want to tug on your heartstrings too much, but you mentioned earlier that your daughter had a birthday, and so 18 years old, is that right?
That is correct.
18. And man, that's awesome. And in our culture, 18 means you're an adult. She'll never be an adult to you. She's always going to be your baby girl, and that's fine. But my question is this: as a father of a young lady who now technically considered to be an adult, in 2 to 3 years, will be in her 20s, and will begin making some very, very difficult, intentional life decisions for herself, right? If she hasn't already. Why is it so important as a father of a young lady for single men to pursue purity and not fall into sins of the world when it comes to this topic? And I give you permission to speak freely as a father of a young lady. What would you say to the man in pursuit of your daughter if he was living an impure life? What would your challenge be to him? I mean, and you can't kill him, so what?
Well, I could,
That's
but
true.
no. I've actually thought about this. I thought about what type of conversation would I have with the person that is pursuing my daughter. And I'll tell you right now, one of the conversations that we will have, and I said we will have, is the conversation about purity. I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not a pie in the sky with this expectation that neither of my child might not make a choice before marriage.
Yeah.
I think that's our hope. That's what we can pray for. But I didn't, and other people haven't either. So I would have that conversation about purity, but also commitment and discipline and character. But I would definitely make sure that guy knew she's my daughter.
Yeah.
And she was mine first.
Yeah.
And so protect her heart, because I'll protect it when she's 55 years old. I'm never going to let go of her heart. And it's going to be a very difficult day when I let someone else take that heart, because when she is married to her husband, if she chooses to get married, that person now has her heart because she'll always be my baby girl. But that person will assume ownership because that is what men, godly men do. Husband and father, you leave your mom and dad and become one. And so having those conversations and real conversations, but also leading with love, and grace too. I'm not going to shame a man that lived a lifestyle such as the one I lived prior to meeting my daughter. I mean, my father-in-law, we didn't necessarily have the conversation, but if we would have, I've been very open and transparent of talking about my life from the time I was a youth. I've always been very open, probably too open with folks, but I personally have never been shy of talking or sharing. But I guarantee he was thinking about that. And I'm thankful that I fulfilled a conversation that he and I had, because we had that conversation before I asked for my wife's hand in marriage. And single guys, if you're pursuing somebody and they happen to have a dad, don't be an idiot. Talk to the dad before you make that step, please.
Yep.
It's one of the most honorable things you could do to a father. But also expect to have a conversation. And we did. And kind of what I just said. The heart. He said that was his goal, to find for his daughter, to find a man that was going to protect her heart, protect those things. And he truly feels that she found that man.
Yeah.
And what a great thing to hear from my bride's dad. But he knew that when we get married, guess what? Two become one.
Yeah.
And he's done his job, and I'm doing my job to talk to her. And guys, I talk with my daughter about the same things. Some people might be like, oh, Papa. In my household, my wife talked to my son about things, and I talk to my daughter about things, because I want her to have a comfortability to talk to all of us. If she feels more comfortable talking to me, sure, I'm going to bring her mom and have her mom be involved. But my daughter is me. More transparent than probably I want her to be. More open than I want to be. If you came to our house and some of the conversation, you're like, did you just say that in front of your dad? And I'm like, yep. But I've welcomed us having conversations that are kind of faux pas in other households.
Yeah.
But because I'm her father, but also what did I do? I protected her heart, I nurtured her heart, and I showed my daughter what a godly husband does.
That's
Some of
right.
you guys know of my story, and this is for a different podcast, but yeah, my wife has been through hell and back medically. And my daughter was watching. She's had some struggles as a result of all of it. All of us have had some struggles emotionally, mentally as a result of it. But the one thing she never had to doubt or never had to worry is that dad was going anywhere. That dad was going to constantly pursue his wife in her heart, not just intimately, guys, but pursue his wife's heart. And I constantly will pursue her. And my daughter has seen that. And that is what we can do for our daughters, is how do you help the single woman? How do you help the single man? By modeling sexual purity.
Absolutely.
But also when you slip, or, hey, I've been there. I made this decision once, and yeah, I was lusting after someone and I was looking at someone. So there's that relatability, because none of us has the name Jesus.
That's right.
So that's what we have done. And that is, I pace life with single guys. I do. And we talk about some real things. And there is that gentle rebuke that a brother, but guess what? I had to earn that trust and gain permissions to have that. So
Yeah.
you have to, if you're giving a rebuke to another brother in Christ and you don't have that relationship, good luck for that person ever coming back to you.
That's right.
It's that gentle rebuke. We don't lead with shame. We don't lead with condemnation. We lead with grace and love. Like in the middle of it, peace, grace, love. And then you can have conversations later on about the importance of purity, the importance of those things.
Yeah.
But the way single men are successful at this are that they can have that brother they have a real conversation with, and he's not going to make them feel like crap.
That's true.
He's not going to say, I mean, sure, in the conversation, yeah, repent, seek forgiveness, things like that. But leading with that, um, and sometimes, guess what? Just shut up and listen. Just be there. And then when the timing is right, when God reveals that to you, you share with them, like, hey, let's talk about how you got yourself in that situation.
Man.
And we walk through things. But a lot of the people I've worked with in my career did talk to someone and try to talk to someone about their struggles. And I've had these conversations. I'm an interviewer. You know, I talk. I have a
Yeah.
great rapport with clients I work with. That was what I was known for. And yeah, hundreds of men I've worked with, they reached out for help at one point in time in their addiction. And the majority of them got shame, not love in return. So if we give them love in return, Randall said, how many of those guys do you think? A lot.
Yeah.
I'll just say that right now. A lot would never have met me if they had a loving individual that was willing to have a conversation with them, have the tough conversation, that they felt comfortable enough to share what they were struggling with, knowing that they weren't going to be beaten or condemned or those things, like a safe spot. My son and I have real talks. I've asked him about stuff, and he knows I'm a safe person to have that because if he came to me and said, hey, Dad, no, I looked at this and I did this and I did that, I'd be like, okay, son. Okay, well, thank you. First and foremost, thank you for bringing that before me. Thank you for trusting me with that. And let's talk, bud. Let's talk. And it doesn't mean consequences won't come with things like, yeah, no, you're not going over to that person's house anymore. Or, nope, we have parameters on internet. Your electronic time, nope. And guess what? I'm going to be looking in your room a little more often. Those types of conversations. But guess what? He came to me knowing that that was going to happen.
Yeah.
But he still came to me. And this is hypothetical. I got to give Cole credit. That kid's, like Randall said, man, my kid's way better 14-year-old than I was. But it is those conversations of you have to have that. But guys, you have to be willing to pace with them and not shame them when they trip and stumble.
Yeah.
Because that happens with me. We trip with simple stuff. Like I helped a brother out the other day when I was in a training. We were sitting having a couple drinks. I wasn't alone. I was with a brother, sitting having a couple drinks, and there was a person next to us that was chit-chatting. That individual went to the bathroom, came back, and guess what? I'm observant. I get paid. I'm a paid observer. Their ring was gone. And I said, hey, she just took off her ring. Da-da-da. And guess what? We left. I wasn't as concerned. But guess what? Thought also crossed this guy's mind.
Yep.
Of, she pursuing him or is she pursuing me? And then guess what? The devil did that loop in my head of, well, you're in a different state. You're this, that. And I'm just being transparent, guys. And I've never been unfaithful to my wife. And guess what? I'm not going to be, because guess what? I fled.
There you go.
I fled. Because who knows? We could have talked all night. Nothing would have happened.
Yeah.
But I'm not going to take that chance. And neither was my coworker. We're like, yep, peace. But it was, it happens to single guys. It happens to guys that are married, because guess what? In this world we live in, when you're married, you ain't off limits. Sometimes you are pursued as a result of that, because of the game and destruction that sexual immorality and sexual sin has for people. On both sides. I know guys that chase married women, and I know married women that chase married guys, and single guys and single women, those types of things. But you have to have brothers to lock shields with and fight together. But you have to have brothers you trust. And for you guys that are fathers, I don't want anyone else replacing me in that realm. That if my son can't talk to me about something, then I'm failing. But I also want him to have an avenue of other brothers that he can seek that wisdom and guidance for. when it may be just an uncomfortable situation or a conversation with dad on his end. It won't be uncomfortable with me. All my kids know that. Nothing's off limits with dad. And sometimes I regret saying that, but it's the truth. And I've talked a lot, Randall, man. So back to you, man.
No, man, that's so good. And I read a book a couple weeks ago, and the title is "Why Don't We Listen Better?" Written by a guy named James Peterson. And man, reading that book, it got me thinking exactly what you're saying. How many of these single guys are crying out for help and needing someone to come alongside them, but guys like you and I are missing it because we're so wrapped up in our own minds. And I think, man, if I could offer maybe a final challenge for the single guy. Now, first, let me talk to the married guy. For the married guy, find a single guy to disciple. Find a single guy, find a young man, someone who, even if they're not a young man, find someone who's single and disciple them. And sometimes, like you said, Brent, that discipleship looks like you just listen. But be bold, be truthful, but be ready to live by example too, and be transparent. And for the single guy, stop trying to fight sin alone. Stop trying to fight sin alone. Whether you're 14 and you hear this because you're riding in the truck with your dad, or you're 54 and you hear this because, somebody sent it to you and you heard it for the first time. Stop trying to fight sin alone. As a married man, I have my wife to fight sin with, but I also have brothers to fight sin with. I have people in my life that I call on, and I did that yesterday. Sent a message out to some brothers and just said, "Hey, I'm in a just horrible mental spot right now. Like, it's been a rough week. It's been a rough day." And one of them replied back and said, "It's only Monday." And I said, "I forgot what day it was." So, you know what I'm saying, man? Find people to help you navigate things in life. And man, if I can encourage the single man, understand this. Living a life outside the boundaries of purity will leave you alone with guilt and consequences. And I'm not even talking about the physical consequences of having a child out of wedlock, a sexually transmitted disease, or burning every bridge you know. I'm talking about the mental, like, dumpster fire that you do in your brain when you break those boundaries and do things that you should not be doing. Guard yourself on those things. And men, like Brent said, flee. I know Brent enough to know, and I know this didn't happen, but I just imagine Brent standing up, throwing his glass on the ground, and just taking off running through the door. And I don't know. I think about that. I've mentioned this before. My favorite commercial of all time is the Little Caesars commercial where he rips off his shirt and he says, "There's no rules." And they say, "Put your shirt back on." He's like, "There's one rule." I love that. And so that just exaggerated, hey man, if you're in a situation and you know you're about to stumble, do something crazy and get out of there. Just start screaming and just run. And I'll tell you what, your chances of crossing boundaries are going to significantly fall. One, people are going to think you're a lunatic. But two, you've got to remove yourself from those situations. And so, Brent, man, I have enjoyed this so much. Thank you for staying up late and doing this. Man, I hope that men are challenged, and I hope that they see that there's grace and there's forgiveness, but there's also an expectation. There's also an expectation of purity that we're called to live by. And the solution is to run, is to flee. Don't sit in those moments of sexual immorality. Don't stand and take that second look or that gaze. Don't position yourself to where you can see. Take your sunglasses off while you're sitting on the beach. I mean, these are practical things. Flee sexual immorality. Flee, flee, flee. Man, I love you, bro. I appreciate you so much. Thank you for your wisdom. Man, is there anything else you'd like to add before we close out?
One thing, as you guys see in the background that I have here, it's the Rembrandt picture of the prodigal son, guys. So I have several of these. I have one in my office. I have one here. And my challenge is just going to be to the dads right now. Are you the prodigal son's father that is willing and anticipatory waiting for your son to return? And you know what he's done, you know what he's out there doing, or guess what? Maybe you don't know. Maybe you don't know what he's done, but he's coming to tell you. And that's what he does. He comes and he falls at your feet. Embrace him.
Yeah.
Kill the fatted calf. Clean him up. And love on him. And guys, do that with your friends too, when you have a single brother that stumbles and falls. Because I know when guys, they pace with me when they're single, a lot of that, I'm a mentor of theirs. They look to me as a mentor. So not a father figure, but of a figure that they respect. Am I positioning myself in a way that they're going to run back to me? And so my challenge to all of you men here is which one are you going to be? You're going to be the father, or you're going to be the brother back there that is just shaming, condemning, and saying, "You idiot. Like, you're so unworthy. You're so disgusting. Like, look at me, I'm perfect. I've done everything." No. If that's you, yeah, let's talk. But I want to be both the prodigal son and I want to be the father.
Absolutely.
I want to have someone I can run to. And I want to have somebody, I want to be the son that feels that safety to run to him, but I also want to be the father that guys can run to me.
Yeah.
And I can embrace and love, meet them where they're at. And let's fight this war together. So that's what I got, man.
Man, so good. So good. Thank you, dude. Well, fellas, that wraps us up for this episode of the Men of Valor podcast. Our topic was single men, but we covered many things tonight. And so I hope you are encouraged by this. I hope maybe you're convicted and maybe there's some change that needs to take place. Convicted is a word that's kind of difficult in your field, isn't it? It means it's something totally different. I hope you feel conviction, maybe not convicted. This is getting odd. Now, I'm tired, Brent. I think I'm going to close this up and go on to bed. So
It's a little later there than it is for me.
I have to tell you, after we got home from the soccer game, I told my family that I was doing this podcast with you, and they all said to tell you and your family hello. And it's
Right
funny.
back
I'll tell you guys this, and then I'll let you go. My wife will ask me periodically, weekly, if I do something stupid or I start acting a fool. She will often say one or two things. Have you talked to Brent about that? Or and she says that not as often as I make it out to be, but she said it before. But she does get excited every time I mention talking to Brent because of how much he means to me. And she was excited to hear that we'd be doing this together. So, man, we think a lot of you. Love you and your family. And men, go light it up for the King.
We hope you've enjoyed today's episode and that you will continue to join us on this journey to make disciples of men. Be sure to check out our social media outlets as well as movministries.org for any information, and be sure to join our digital men's community.
Hey guys, we wanted to let you know that Men of Valor podcast is proud to partner and be a part of the Recovering Fundamentalist Podcast Network. You can find their podcast and many other great podcasts by going to rfpnetwork.org. We would love for you to go and check them out as well. Hey, keep fighting, win today, and as always, go light it up for the King.